A waiter slid past with a silver trivet full of crushed ice and glittering oysters. I'd already licked paprika off a plate abandoned by a stranger in the alley. I was retrieving a bana from the trash, miraculously unharmed from someone's lunch. My son's laughter echoed through the heat of the kitchen, light, high-pitched, the same one he'd let out when I read him pirate stories. "Another dozen," he said, unaware that his mother was 10 steps away, setting out containers and swallowing shame. I counted his orders by the shells clinking in the trash. 4 dozen for the table. 2 glasses of champagne for his wife. And me, a 69-year-old grandmother, hunched over in the steam and dripping water, memorizing a code I didn't yet know how to read. Here's the part one shouldn't spoil but will. 3 weeks after that night, I walked back into that same restaurant under the chandelier and set a small brown envelope on the maitre d's podium. When they opened it, the kitchen went silent, my son stood, and the sound of ice settling in a tub of oysters was the last normal sound that room ever heard. I wasn't always a woman who knew what a kitchen sounded like from the wrong side of the door. Until last winter, I was a school librarian with a pension too small for comfort and too big for pity. My name is Vera. The grandchildren call me Gran V. I knit, I correct grammar in my head, and I can still pick up a toddler with one arm. When George, my husband, died 6 years ago, I kept the house and our lemon tree and my habit of making lists. After the second winter alone, my son Ethan took to showing up with pastries and business plans. "You should let me help," he'd say, sliding a glossy folder across my table with the candor of a 99-cent saint. He worked in development, restaurants and boutique hotels, hospitality. He called it, as if kindness could be stapled to a spreadsheet. "We'll put your money into something that lives, Mom." He had my eyes and his father's persuasive quiet. I signed where the attorney streaming from his phone told me to sign, a simple authorization for him to handle certain transactions on my behalf, a temporary transfer so he could shield my savings during an expansion. Too many soft words. I let them roll over me like warm water. By spring, my accounts were leaner. "It's tied up short-term," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck, the same tell he had at 8 when he'd broken the vase and blamed the cat. He and his wife Carla were always en route to a tasting or a meeting, their calendars a series of private rooms and plated amuse-bouches. They took my granddaughter to a seafood place for her birthday in April, their preferred sort, the kind with live mollusks and a chalkboard shaped like a sail. The photos on Carla's social media made my belly go tight. A silver tower of shell on ice, hands I recognized holding lemon wedges, the caption "Oysters with my king." When the gas company stuck a pink notice to my door, pride lasted exactly 6 hours. I buttoned the better cardigan, put my wedding ring on a chain, and went looking for work. The mariner's table took me because I had a spine and soggy shoes, and the manager, a woman with a harsh blonde ponytail, needed a closer who wouldn't complain about taking the bus. It wasn't lost on me that the mariner's table was where Ethan's company had once hosted a client dinner so long my back ached by the time we left. That night, he asked for the check with a flourish. "Watch this, Mom," he whispered, like he'd pull a card trick that turned into a life. Now I stood in that same dining room's shadow, napkin tucked into my collar, because the spray from the sprayer found your collarbones every time. I counted. 2 dozen Kumamotos. 1 dozen Velens. When he said, "Give us a dozen caravels," something inside me pinched. I've loved words my whole life. I shelved them for 30 years. I know their shapes. There is no oyster named caravel. Before I could ask anyone, Henry, the busser with hands like bark, slid a tub of cutlery toward me. "That table in 4, he said without looking up, "isn't really eating oysters." "What are they eating?" I said. Henry shrugged and dipped a towel into sanitizer. "Time, I guess." Every night, I watched my son become someone new under the chandelier. Every morning, I strapped tape around cardboard and sorted glass and left with the smell of brine in my hair. Yes, once, on a bad shift, I snapped a lemon seed between my teeth and sucked it clean. Judge me, I've already judged myself. The first clue wasn't the caravels. It was a receipt, half-printed, spat out by the POS printer during a rush. Henry grabbed it, swore softly, and shoved it under the register. When he left to refill water, I tugged the corner and slid it into my apron. A table for 4 had ordered 3 items: sunroom, pelican, harbor, capitalized like masterpieces, and the total was exactly $24,000. Someone had written a tiny neat O next to pelican and a tiny X next to harbor. I worked the late shift because the day was for people who still had a place to be. The night was for those who had to make do. So I made do. I folded the receipt into the book I kept in my pocket, George's old bridge score notebook, and wrote beside it, O means yes, X means no, sunroom equals deposit. When you keep order for a living, you learn to see it even where it's been set on fire. The backside of paperwork, the margin of a menu, the chalk under the chalkboard, people write where they think no one looks. I'm 69. Invisible is my superpower. During breaks, I stood in the alley and shared cigarettes I didn't smoke with the dishwashers. They talked. Names came up. Marco, the owner who never met a mirror he didn't find trustworthy. Fox, his sommelier with a pocket full of sapphire cufflinks. Danny, the hostess with a laugh like somebody's ringtone. And my son, always the guy from Harbor 9. Harbor 9 was Ethan's development firm. The restaurant used them when they built the new side entrance, when they bought the bar next door and turned it into a private room with oil paintings of ships and a lock that clicked softly, like a polite throat clearing. The day the sugar bowl went empty in the staff room, I texted my granddaughter a photo of the lemon tree. The lemons are fat this year, I wrote. She sent back a boatload emoji and a heart I pretended was for me. I didn't ask why they didn't call. I didn't ask how many oysters an apology would buy. I taped another grimy box and watched the prep cook flick a pearl out of an oyster and into his apron pocket. They happen sometimes, he said, looking at my raised eyebrow. Tiny. Not worth much. We give them to brides. I was the only bride that kitchen would ever see who knew what an audit smelled like. After closing one night, I lingered by the private room and pretended to polish the silver. My son had his back to me. He sat with Marco and 2 men who looked like the kind of lawyers who hire other lawyers. Their voices ducked and swung. No more pelicans, one said. The harbor board is skittish. We'll move caravels to Friday deliveries, Marco murmured. Mom, Ethan said, chuckling when his phone lit. He didn't see me in the glass. He answered. No, we won't be late. Yes, get the limoncello. Tell Maya to try the small oysters, they're sweet. You'll like them, baby. It's the brine. I took the long way home, passing the glass front where my son's reflection floated like a fish in a bowl he didn't know someone else owned. Somewhere between the crosswalk and my stoop, I found my spine again. The next day, I took the bus 2 extra stops and knocked on a door that smelled like peppermint and printer ink. Ray lives there, my neighbor from years ago, quick hands, quicker mind. She used to do compliance for the county. People who don't make waves either marry them or learn to surf. Ray learned both. I'm busy, she said without opening the door. Then she opened it anyway. Vera. Her face softened. Did you break the internet or just a heart? I need eyes, I said. Not pity. Not permission. Can you look at some numbers? Numbers are the only faithful men, she said. She put on the kettle, waited for me to sit, and clicked her laptop open the way surgeons snap on gloves. I laid out what I'd stolen, the half receipt, a business card with a dot of oyster liquor that had soaked the address, a folded napkin with a chalk smear, and 3 notes in George's book. Something like a code swam on the page: sunroom, pelican, harbor, caravel, O's and X's, totals that moved as if pushed by a tide. Ray read silently. They're not pretending very hard, she said finally. Pelican is an alderman. Harbor is the city board. Sunroom's got to be the permit office day shift. She tapped the caravel. And that? That's not food. That's a drop. What's a drop? Money that isn't money until it isn't anywhere, she said. Why are you involved? Because I ate leftover tartare out of a compost bin while my son fed a man named Pelican $24,000 in the corner booth and called it oysters. Ray blew on her tea. All right then. We don't make a call yet. People who want to hide their crimes have friends who answer phones. We collect. We make it safe and boring to catch them. And we do it someplace where they're sure no one old can read the writing on the wall. What place is that? Instagram, she said, shoving her laptop toward me. Show me every photo with that restaurant tagged in it for the last 6 months. I'm old, not stupid. The tots in my knitting circle can stalk a cheating boyfriend through 5 counties in under an hour. Together, Ray and I built a map of vanity. Private rooms, oyster towers, 2 men with recognizable suits, a woman in a blue dress whose bracelets repeated in 3 different rooms, meaning she belonged to all of them. We built timelines and cross-checked bookings with permit approvals. We laid clear plastic over a calendar and watched a pattern form. The nights with caravels coincided with the mornings when buildings got permission to climb above their shadows. That was the detective work. The revenge grew out of it like a pearl around grit. YouTube would probably prefer I say I confronted him right then, right there, napkin in hand and God behind me. That's not how we win when we have no keys to any doors. We win with habit. I went to work. I polished forks until I could see my face look less tired. I freshened coffee for cooks at 2 a.m. I remembered names. I became harmless. I watched. I realized Danny, the hostess, had a boyfriend who never came in the front door. I realized Fox kept a second cell phone in the napkin drawer. I realized the maitre d' took photographs of letters that weren't addressed to him. And I realized that my son, my only boy, the child who once cried when I stepped on a snail, had learned to slurp without choking. I wrote another list. What is Caravel? Who is Pelican? Where does the money go? When do they drop it? Why my son? On a Sunday afternoon when the restaurant was closed to the public for a charity tasting, I slipped in among the volunteers in a borrowed black shirt with a bar towel slung at my hip, like everyone else. The private room doors were propped open. Inside, a chalkboard stood on an easel, covered with the names of courses. Someone had wiped off the bottom half in a hurry but missed the edges. The tail of a letter remained, a hooked C with a crossbar. Caravel. I put the bar towel on the chalk tray and pulled it across the board like I meant to clean. The towel came away dark. I folded that patch over twice, slid it under my waistband, and kept wiping. 20 minutes later, there was nothing left on the board and everything left on my towel. At Ray's table that night, we sprayed lemon juice across the towel and watched the letters climb out, faint but legible. Caravel, Friday, 11:45 p.m. Back-end trance, Pelican plus harbor sign-off, O equals wired, X equals cash. Sunroom equals delivery. Ray looked up at me over the towel, even and quiet. Vera, this is not just your son's problem anymore. I know, I said. What do you want out of this? An apology, I said. And for him to stop before a door closes behind him, and I can't open it from the outside. I looked at the towel spread like a flag on her table. And I want to make them eat something that isn't theirs. You want your money back, she said. I shook my head. That too. But mostly, I want them to see me. I want them to know it was me who changed the room. Ray drank the last of her tea. Okay, Grand V. Then we aim for a spectacle they cannot drown in sauce. But we do it by the book. We. I said. We, she said, and tapped the towel. Because if they're using food to hide crimes, there's a health code lever to pull that no lobbyist can stop. There's a moment in every book where the librarian knows who did it and the author makes her wait 2 chapters before she says the name. Life imitates that kind of cruelty. I knew now. Not all of it, not yet, but enough to begin. And that's why, the next time I stood in the alley wiping a small smear of aioli off my finger, I didn't feel small. I kept my head down when Ethan crossed to the private entrance. I counted his oysters, not out of hunger, but to measure the time between now and the night the maitre d' would open my brown envelope and say, oh. I was going to set the table for a reckoning, and I would make them use their best napkins. If you'd told me a year ago that I'd learned to read a ledger written in oysters, I would have laughed myself off my stoop. But it turns out launderers love pretty metaphors. Pelicans carry fish in their beaks. Harbors are where ships become cities. Sunrooms are bright places where you pretend nothing's hidden. Caravel is a vessel that was built to cross oceans fast and dangerous and leave no wake. Put that on ice, and you have a menu a judge can taste even if he's never had raw bar. Ray drew the lines. I filled in the corners. We didn't call the police. We called the inspector. Not the one on TV with the stern jaw and a fondness for slamming doors, but the city health inspector who knows kitchens like we know our pantries. Her name was Tilda. She's in her 50s with a braid a teenager would envy and a temper she keeps in a clear Tupperware to use sparingly. Ray had trained her once, years back, when they still believed the job was to keep meat cold and hands washed. The job is that and more. It's also to notice when facts don't line up, when deliveries arrive after doors lock, when raw shellfish gets signed for at midnight in a city that says it doesn't happen. I can't move unless I can write it, Tilda said, her fingers grazing the towel like she was reading Braille. And I can't write it unless I can see it. You will, Ray said. Friday. Back entrance. 11:45. What's the brown envelope? Tilda asked me, because I said I planned to bring one. Proof, I said. The kind that keeps anyone from saying this is about a mother and a son and not about the law. What kind of proof? Ray said. The kind I'm going to collect tonight, I said, and let them try to stop me. Here's the thing about doors that say staff only. If you've held one open for years for people who barely glance at you, you learn the weight of its hinge. I didn't need to break in. I needed to move like a woman who belongs. I wore the black shirt that hung big on the shoulders, tied a towel at my waist, and put my hair into a knot I used to wear when I changed diaper pails at church. I walked in at 4 on Thursday like I always did and slid a small, flat rectangle onto the bottom of the cleaning cart, an old bicycle Belle George had mounted on our toddler stroller back when Ethan was a runner. It was my own alarm system. 2 turns of the wheel would sound like a clumsy new hire bumping the mop bucket. 3 turns, soft in succession, meant someone had pulled the cart into the private room and shut the door. I could hear that bell from the alley with the kitchen fans hacking in my ears. Danny, the hostess, was at her podium, tapping names like a prayer. Hi, Gran, she whispered, not unkindly. You get called variations of grandmother when you work in places that hire people who still believe staying up late is a personality. I didn't mind. Grandmother is a job. They should put it on resumes. At 6, the first tower went out. At 7, Ethan floated in, tie not yet loosened, smile set to investor. He kissed Carla's cheek without looking at her. A man with a lapel pin shook his hand, and a woman with a city badge at her waist didn't bother to hide it. Henry bumped my elbow. He didn't have to point. I was already looking. At 8:30, someone put the wrong key in the private room lock and swore, loud enough to make 3 tables turn. At 9, Fox dropped a cufflink that rolled under the bar, and I watched him sweat like butter on a scallop. At 10:15, the bicycle bell tolled twice and then again, 3 little chirps half a minute apart. Private room, door shut, 2 entrances. At 10:18, a white van nosed into the alley, lights damped to a glow, and the driver killed the engine before the tires stopped moving. I wheeled the cart toward the door. Henry passed me with a tray of water glasses and pretended the cart had caught his foot. He laughed loud, so the soft knock on the back door sounded like nothing at all. I opened it. The delivery man didn't look up. He shoved 2 wax-sealed fish tubs toward me, box seals unbroken, invoices folded into the handles. I felt the edges with my thumb. Real seals. Real invoices. Real fish? We'd see. The tubs didn't smell like the ocean does when you're facing it. They smelled like the ocean does when someone locked it in a closet. My stomach tightened. I pushed the cart down the hall and stopped just before the private room. The cleaning closet was 2 doors back, empty except for a mop that had lost half its hair. I slid the fish tubs into the closet, closed myself inside, and breathed through my mouth. I sliced the seal on the first tub with the thin blade I used to free stuck labels from wine bottles. Inside, oysters, yes. But something else too, a vacuum-sealed envelope taped under the inner lip. I rinsed my hands in the slop sink, patted them dry on the inside hem of my shirt, peeled the envelope free, and slid it into the spine of George's notebook. The second tub held something heavier. I eased the lid up an inch. Stacks of $100 bills wrapped in clear bands, nested in ice packs like they were perishable too. I put the lid back on, reseated the seal with my thumbnails, and stood very still until my pulse was quiet enough to hear the mop water breathe. There is a special kind of luck that looks like experience. It found me then. Danny banged on the closet door. Gran, someone spilled in 4. I hauled the cart out, bumped the lock as if by accident, and left the tubs exactly where anyone with authority could find them 2 minutes and a signature later. I cleaned a perfectly clean spill into a perfectly clean pan while my son looked through me the way people look through glass to see their own reflection. You want the confrontation, don't you? The part where I stand up in front of the man I raised and say, "You took my money, you took my name, and now you're taking other people's futures." Not today. Me too. But that's not how this kind of story moves if it wants to be believed and not just watched. I kept mopping until the mop left no trace of water behind and the floor gleamed like a polished lie. 11:42. The bell chimed in triple. The delivery hall was empty. The back door camera's red LED blinked like a heartbeat. Ray texted a single dot. Tilda texted the letter T. Our alphabet was a prayer. Wait, wait, wait. I rolled the cart back to the closet and sprawled the towel on the top shelf as if I had just tossed it there carelessly. On the towel, webbed under the lemon juice we'd sprayed and the chalk dust we'd preserved, the words we needed waited for the right set of eyes. I put the sealed tubs back on the floor and cracked the closet door open an inch. The hallway's paint was the color of cold broth. I could see only the baseboards and the legs of whoever walked by. 11:46. Loafers passed, Marco. He walked on his toes always. Sneakers, Fox. He walked like a man who could run if necessary, but would rather not. A shoe with a metal shank that clicked faintly, Pelican, I guessed, by the way Fox stepped behind him like a stagehand. My son's shoes came last, planted, too steady, the step of a man who didn't doubt what awaited him on the other side of a door. He had learned to walk into rooms that way by watching me the day he tripped on the school stage, and I clapped until other people joined. It is a terrible thing to see a skill you gave your child turn toward doors that should never open. The cleaning closet hides 3 things: a light, a hook, and a hole drilled 3 years ago by a plumber with an attitude who told me while I was on a ladder changing a bulb that he drilled it so he wouldn't have to run to the loading dock to see if the delivery arrived. I put my eye to the hole. The private room was a painting in a museum about to close. Men at a table. Silver domes. A ledger. A stack of envelopes. The tubs. Marco lifted one lid with an exaggerated little flourish, and the smell of Tide came out like a rumor. Pelican did not look impressed. My son slid an envelope across the table. Fox lifted the ledger like it sang. He put his pen on O and X as if he was writing a melody, and for a full 30 seconds I let the sadness of it sit on me. Then Tilda knocked like a person who never apologizes for keeping the living alive. City Health, she said, voice carrying. You would be amazed how far a voice can travel when it has paperwork. And compliance. That would be Ray, who has a way of saying her name as if there is only one woman in the world named Ray who carries a bag full of printed law. What followed felt like watching a pan boil. At first nothing, then tiny movement at the edges, then everything at once. Doors opened. Feet shuffled. Men put hands on chins. Men checked pockets for something that would make this not be happening. My son reached for his phone and stopped when he saw me pushing the cleaning cart down the hall, as if the sight of his mother might somehow be a more dangerous contamination than a tub of cash. I did not look at him until I had parked the cart against the only wall that would let me be a witness and a grandmother at the same time. Who's responsible for receiving? Tilda said, crisp and kind. She does kind the way surgeons do it, spare and edged with stainless steel. Marco raised his hand, smiling like a man at a wedding when someone asks who gave this woman to this man, and he knows the answer is terrible and true. And who signed for shellfish at 11 o'clock at night? You'll need to see the ledger, Ray said. She put a pair of clean gloves on and looked at Fox. Would you mind? Fox minded. Fox minded like his life depended on having minded earlier. But he handed it over because some women are past asking. There is always that one stubborn second when men like Marco compound their error with charm. Ladies, he said, we all want the city to thrive. These are special deliveries, you understand. The finest quality sometimes arrives off hours. No deliveries after 10 except with variants, Tilda said, turning the page. No variants on file. No variants on record for the past 6 months. No variants since. She turned another page, tapped a date. Since Harbor 9 completed the back entrance. That is your firm, Mr. Hart. She said my son's name like it had already been filed. He started to stand. She shook her head once, and he sat because she's the kind of woman boys sit for. Ray set the towel on the table next to the ledger. Additionally, she said softly, your chalkboard appears to have grown a memory. Caravel, Friday, 11:45. I'm old enough to know a schedule when I see one. It's a theme, Marco said, the charm gone jagged. Our designers like to tell a story with the menu. That's the problem with stories, Ray said. Eventually, someone turns the page. Spare me the lines, the city badge woman said, the one I'd seen by the bar with a careful smile. Tilda, it looks like cause for temporary closure. Inspections triggered, compliance audits, a hold on the merchant account until... Yes, Tilda said. Look at that sunroom with a capital S. I have never seen a sunroom capitalized in any restaurant. Not even in San Francisco. She did not look at me. She didn't have to. I felt in my knees the way a classroom feels when the bell rings and the person who forgot to study realizes the teacher has rearranged the test. What is this? Ethan whispered, to no one and everyone. Mom? Someone's dinner, I said. And someone else's mortgage and another's job and another's vote. It came out colder than the crushed ice. It didn't sound like me. We can explain, Marco said, battered by a wave of language he did not control. We can show. You can stop talking, Ray said. The brown envelope wasn't for them. It was for the room. For the chandelier. For the cameras hidden in black domes. For the barback who had never seen an inspection. For the server who thought the O stood for oysters. I placed it on the maitre d's podium, because that was the single piece of furniture that had spent months making me feel as if I were a ghost. When the maitre d' opened it, he found photocopies, the receipt with O's and X's, the towel's slow bleed of chalk letters, the invoice with a variance that did not exist, the bank routing number that matched a Caravel Logistics one-room office above a laundromat where I'd once paid to dry George's shirts after the heater went out. On top of the stack, I'd placed a photo of me and Ethan when he was 6, both of us in paper hats eating chowder at a booth beneath a different chandelier. I am not a saint. I wanted his eyes to find that photograph and slide off the rest, and then be forced to look back down and see what I had put underneath our faces. I will be closing your kitchen pending review, Tilda said. She said it gently, like you tell a child we cannot have a treat tonight. I will be contacting the state and the attorney's office. Please call whoever you need to call whose number is legal to call. We'll inventory the shellfish now. Do you consent? Or do we all get a warrant and do this again in 12 hours? Marco lifted his hands. Do it now, he said. For expediency. It sounded like begging's cousin. Ethan didn't look at me again. He stared at the ledger as if he could make the O's and X's flip. Carla put a hand on his arm and took it away when he twitched. You can love a person through a lot. You cannot love them through a math puzzle that has chosen its own answer. Outside, the night had turned slick. The alley reflected the back door in ripples. I stood by the dumpsters and let the air burn the smell of brine out of my throat. I thought of George, who carried a coin in his pocket he told me was for luck, and I'd told him was for habit. I thought of Maya's last message, we got the big tower. She'd used 3 exclamation marks. The child I love lives in a home where exclamation marks are a kind of food. Henry came out and leaned next to me, elbows on knees like a man at a funeral who understands the dead won't care if he's in a suit. You did that, he said. We did that, I said. He nodded toward the door. They're going to say you did it because you're angry at your son. I am, I said. And because I'm a citizen of a city that thinks it can build a sunroom over rot. I smiled despite myself. And because chalk shouldn't be smarter than the men who write with it. Henry snorted. Ray says the state's going to want statements tomorrow. You ready to tell yours? I looked down at my hands. The lemon smell clung. I wiped them on my apron and reached into the pocket for the envelope I'd slipped from the fish tub. It was heavier than paper should be. I broke the seal. Inside, instead of the crisp rumor of cash, there was a ring. Gold with a crest. It was pitted with salt like something that had lived at the bottom of a drawer or the sea. My breath hitched. It was not George's signet, his had a dove, not a trident. Inside this one, someone had scratched 2 letters shallowly with a knife. That's not money, Henry said. No, I said, as something shifted under the floorboards of this story. It's evidence. Of what? I didn't know yet. Detective plots are like oysters too. You open a shell thinking you'll see the sea, and instead you find a bead of grit wrapped in something luminous that hurts your tongue. All I knew then was this. Whatever caravel carried, it had hauled something heavier than cash across a dark water, and thought no one would notice the weight. I slept in my little apartment that night with the ring under my pillow like a child guarding a tooth. At dawn, when the light made a white path across my floorboards, I texted Ray a photo of the inscription. She didn't answer. I was making tea when someone knocked on my door. I opened it and found my granddaughter on the stoop, hair in 2 braids, eyes older than she knew. Dad told me not to come, Maya said. So I came. Behind her, a woman in a navy blazer stood, hands in pockets, face set. She looked like a person who had spent a lifetime being polite to people whose fathers were louder. Miss Hart, she said. I'm Assistant District Attorney Patel. May we come in? We sat at my tiny table, 3 generations of women who could carry a city on our backs if someone would just let us rest once in a while. I told Patel everything except the part where my heart broke. She'd seen that before. She didn't need it in the record. When I showed her the receipt, she smiled for the first time. When I showed her the ring, she didn't. Where did you get that? She asked, too still. Back entrance of the Mariner's table, I said. 11:52 p.m., more or less. It was taped under the inner lip of a fish tub. The seal was intact. I resealed it. Patel reached into her blazer and pulled out a photo. Same ring, different light. On the finger of a man standing on a dock with a boy whose hair was stuck to his forehead from the sea. On the back, someone had written, Ivan Novak, Pier 6, 2001. Who's that? Maya whispered. Someone who didn't come home, Patel said. And someone who won't, if we're not careful with what we do next. When the ADA leaves a ring on your table and tells you to breathe quietly, you learn your story is bigger than you planned. Revenge wants a target and a clean arc. Justice wants paperwork. And sometimes justice and revenge agree that spectacle is not a sin if it reminds men who think they are safe that walls are not the only things that hold up a building. Sorrow sat with me like a second grandmother. Late that afternoon, the restaurant's front windows went dark. A notice with Tilda's signature glared from the glass. Half the city decamped to the other seafood place across town. The news did its news voice. A blogger with a shellfish allergy wrote a think piece about corruption and hives. Underneath all that noise, a mother put soup on the stove and tried to decide if she had saved her child or ruined him. I did not sleep. The ring and the receipt and the towel were tucked into an old cookie tin I had not opened since Maya lost a tooth in my living room, and we danced because something small and old had made way for something larger. In the morning, Ethan called. Mom, he said, voice hoarse, what did you do? You added oysters to a ledger to hide bribes under supper, I said. And the sea got tired of holding your secrets. I can fix this. No, I said, and I let the words stand there like a wall he could not knock down. You can only tell the truth and hope it forgives you. He was silent for a long time. You set me up. I set a table, I said, and asked you to show up with your real appetite. Why? He whispered. Why would you do this to me? You want to know what I said? I want to tell you I said something polished and precise, something worthy of the women who'd held me up this week. But all I said was the oldest truth in the world, because I love you. And because I remember who taught you to say please and thank you to the waitress. He didn't hang up. He didn't cry. He breathed. Then he said the strangest thing. Mom, he whispered, Carla's mother had the passwords. I did not see that coming. But you will have to wait, like I did, to know what that meant, because in that moment, someone slid a note under my door without knocking. It was on thick paper that smelled faintly of cucumber. My name was written in a tidy hand I recognized from folded menus. Vera. Marco would like to apologize. Private room. 8 o'clock. No oysters. Danny. There is a kind of apology that's a trap and another kind that's an invitation. The trick is knowing which one is which before you sit down. I folded the note, put it in the cookie tin with the ring, and chose a dress I haven't worn in 10 years. It's navy with tiny mother-of-pearl buttons. I buttoned all of them. The private room looked different without light. They'd turned the chandelier off, left only the wall sconces glowing the color of old honey. The table was empty except for a pitcher of water and 4 small plates. No silver domes tonight. No crushed ice towers. No language they could hide inside of. Marco stood when I entered, which made me suspicious. A man who only stands for men is either ready to learn or ready to lie. Beside him, Fox held a folder the way some men hold babies they were never taught to touch. Ethan sat at the corner like a child called to the principal's office who brought his mother, because maybe she still knows how to translate. "Miss Hart," Marco said. "Thank you for coming." "I am a dishwasher," I said. "I'm here for the crumbs." I sat. It's amazing how much power sits down when women do. Marco smiled like a shrug. "We'd like to reach an understanding." "With the city?" I asked. "With you," he said. Fox placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside, statements, copies of contracts, a letter on letterhead printed with Harbor 9's logo. It was a letter authorizing my son to make decisions on behalf of family trusts and in full faith and confidence granted under durable power of attorney. My name was there in looping cursive that did not belong to me. "I never signed that," I said. "You did," Ethan said, voice flat, "but it wasn't this. Someone reused your signature." I picked the paper up. Beneath the forgery, there was a faint impression from whatever had been signed above it once upon a time. I tilted the page toward the light. The impression was a letter from my church thanking me for bringing soup to the nursery volunteers. I remember the day I spilled broth on my shoe and laughed at myself. Someone had slipped a sheet of something else under my hand when I signed. Not someone. I turned to my son. He shook his head. He wasn't lying for once. "Who?" I asked. Fox swallowed. "We believe Ms. Chancellor," he said. "Carla's mother. She assisted with..." He stopped. Words failed him for perhaps the first time in his adult life. "With turning my kitchen into a bank," I said. "She wants more than a restaurant," Ethan said, staring at his hands. "She wants the land under it. The permits were the point. The oysters were theater." I should have been surprised. I was, in the way thunder surprises you even when you've seen lightning count down. I remembered a woman at my son's table who wore bracelets that whispered against one another like conspirators. I remembered her saying, "Everyone wants quality," and the way the room leaned in as if quality meant something other than whatever we can claim no one else can have. "What do you want from me?" I said. Marco spread his hands. "You have friends with badges now, apparently. We would prefer this all be dealt with cleanly. Quietly. We would prefer, for the sake of staff and investors, that closure be temporary and not mortal." "You want me to tell the city that the oysters are only a little bit illegal," I said. "I want you to remember your son's future," Marco said. "And your granddaughter." I looked at Ethan. He did not meet my eyes. In a corner of the carpet, something gleamed. A pearl. The kind you flick into a pocket for brides. It must have rolled out when Fox opened a drawer. The private room has a way of coughing up whatever you think you've hidden there. I bent, picked it up, and set it on the folder. They all watched it like it might explode. It didn't. It just sat there, small and round and maddeningly pure. "That ring belonged to Ivan Novak," I said, because I wanted to be the one to say his name in this room. He disappeared. His wife went to sleep and woke up, and he never came home. If I open my mouth the way you want me to, I bury him one more time. "We didn't," Fox began. "You don't know what you did," I said. "That's the entire point." Patel stepped into the room then, uninvited, walking like every door in the city disapproved of her, and she'd never once asked them for their opinion. Behind her, Tilda lingered, taking in the temperature of the air with a glance. Danny had let them in. I saw the edge of her ponytail vanish out of the corner of my eye as the door clicked. "I told you 8 o'clock, Danny whispered later when I found her by the staff sink. "I didn't tell you I also told them. I grew up on docks. My father knew Ivan. You don't get to disappear, not in my city." Patel didn't bother with intro. "Your merchant account is frozen," she said, laying papers out as if she were setting a table too. "Your ledgers are evidence. Your variance file will be examined by people who don't eat here. You can spend the next year in litigation, or you can start talking names I don't already have. It took 2 hours for something like truth to make its way out of men who had confused debt with destiny. Names fell like shells in a bucket. Miss Chancellor. A city staffer whose brother had a boat. A courier who loved cash more than sleep. None of it brought Ivan back. It brought him into the room, though, and we had to make room for him at the table. At the end of it, Marco asked to speak to me alone. Patel nodded. She'd gotten what she needed for now. I will not go to prison, he said without preamble as the door latched. Men like me don't. We turn into consultants and write books. But kitchen's close. And I don't want that on my head. Kitchen's close, I said, when they forget why food is holy. He looked at me with something that might have been respect if you were a better man. It will be easier for your son if I say you were a disgruntled employee. I laughed. It startled me, that sound in this room. Say what you like, I said. Mothers are always already disgruntled. We care. It ruins the fun. When I left, the alleys smelled like lemons and rain. I put the pearl in my pocket and the ring back in the tin and slept for the first time in a week without dreaming about ice. The story should end here. It doesn't, because the tide keeps moving even when you think you've measured it. 2 days later, a notice showed up on the restaurant door with a new signature, a temporary management agreement. The Mariners' table would reopen in 3 weeks under supervision, with a new owner of record. The new owner's name was a shell company I'd never seen before, Caravel LLC. Ray phoned. That can't be coincidence, she said. It's not, I said. In the brown envelope I'd left that first night, under the towel and the chalk letters and the receipt, I'd placed a single-page deed transfer, unfinished, and signed, and dated 6 months out. I had found it folded into a catering contract, a copy carved with my son's e-signature. The buyer was Caravel LLC. The seller, the Mariners' table. The price, $1, consideration of family partnership restructuring to follow. The signature line for my son was blank, the signature line for MS. Chancellor had a clean loop and a flourish. Vera, Ray said, voice low. The V. Could be anything, I said. The lemon tree outside my window looked smug. Could be victory. Venture. Vicious. Could be Vera, Ray said. If someone wanted to hide in plain sight and frame a woman for the crime of inconvenient truth. It could, I said. I do not believe in coincidence when paper is involved. I wish I could tell you we pinched MS. Chancellor and my son testified and men in suits apologized to people whose rents had gone up because permits turned into towers. Life doesn't clap on cue. There was an indictment in the papers. There was also a gala honoring development innovation 2 months later, and if you looked closely at the photos you could see familiar bracelets flashing in a different room. Justice isn't a door that shuts. It's a hallway you keep your feet under. Ethan came by the house at dusk a week after the restaurant reopened. He stood on my stoop like a boy who'd miscounted how far the curb was. I told them everything I knew, he said. Was it enough? I asked. I don't know, he said. Maybe I knew less than I thought I did. He handed me a small gift bag. I don't like gifts in sacks. They make it too easy to put feelings away. Inside was a paper envelope, soft with wear. Receipts. The bridge score notebook. The letter from my church, the original, coffee stain and all, from the day they took my signature and repurposed it. He held it out to me with both hands like something sacred. Maybe it was. I thought about saying I was protecting you, he said. But that's not true. I was protecting the story I told about myself. Would you like some tea? I asked, because it is in my nature to rescue people with beverages, even when they have dragged me down to the bottom of a sea and asked me to open my eyes. We sat on the stoop. Leaves turned the street to a river that didn't move. Maya texted me a photo of a grilled cheese she'd made herself, the bread a little too dark, the cheese too thick, perfect in a way that happens only the first few times. It tastes like Saturday, she wrote. I sent back a heart and a lemon. I don't know how to say I'm sorry, Ethan whispered. You start with those 3 words, I said, and then you say them again, when no one is asking. We were quiet for a long time. Mom, he said at last, who is Caravel? I could have told him I didn't know. It would have been almost true. Instead, I reached into my pocket and put the pearl in his palm. Someone who understands that grit wrapped in beauty can choke you if you forget where it came from, I said. Someone who writes their name in chalk, not ink. He stared at the pearl. He didn't cry. He didn't laugh. He closed his hand and put it in his pocket like a man who has found something small he cannot spend. A week later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside, a single photograph, me, in the private room, taken from somewhere high and to the right, setting the brown envelope on the podium. On the back, in a tidy hand I recognized from folded menus, someone had written, "For the woman who shucked the truth." The envelope also held a key, tarnished, numbered 6. No note. No instructions. Just a key whose teeth felt familiar under my thumb, though I'd never turned it. I don't know yet what door that key opens. Maybe Pier 6, where Ivan Novak once stood with a boy and a ring. Maybe a storage unit where someone put away a ledger they couldn't bear to burn. Maybe a mailbox rented by a woman who doesn't believe good men are the only ones allowed to build things. I walked down to the bay that evening with the key in my pocket. The tide was out. Children ran across flats, squealing when their boots sucked. The restaurant lights across the street were back on, but dimmer, as if the building had learned to whisper. Somewhere between two waves slapping pylons, I laughed. It sounded like a woman who was hungry and had finally learned that eating scraps was never the plan. It was the prologue. Did I get my money back? Some of it. Enough to fix the porch. Did my son learn? He is learning. He takes longer now to order anything expensive. He uses his last names less like passwords and more like questions. He calls his daughter Kid instead of Princess and asks her to try the small oysters only after she says she's in the mood. If you need everything tied up with ribbon, this will disappoint you. We live in a city where ribbons are used to hide things as often as to tie them. The ledger is in a box under my bed. The ring is with Patel, who has promised me she will not bury it in evidence if the story wants air. The pearl sits in a bowl on my kitchen table, next to a lemon that refuses to turn soft even though I forgot it on the counter 2 days ago. Some nights I wake to the sound of ice settling in a tub of oysters. Some mornings I wake to the sound of my phone buzzing with a message from the girl who will inherit whatever this city decides to call itself when we are gone. Gran, Maya wrote this morning, "Tell me a story about a ship that sailed where it wasn't supposed to." All right, I texted back. But first we eat. I cut the lemon, salt the bread, and heat the pan. On the windowsill, the key gleams like a tooth in a grin I haven't yet figured out. I don't know what it opens. I don't know if I want to. Some doors are better left waiting until you've built enough of a spine to walk through them. I am building. I am setting the table. I am placing the brown envelope in the middle of whatever room I enter next. And if someone asks me what I'm doing there, I will say, with the calm of a woman who has counted shell after shell until the tide turned, just checking the menu.
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.